The night before the final round, the air felt tight, like a held breath. Fluorescent lights hummed above concrete aisles, and whispers slid along the walls. Quiet talk of standards, of optics, of rules that might change by morning. Jane stood alone at Muffin's stall, fingers pressed into the warm, familiar curve of his neck, feeling the steady rhythm beneath her palm. He chewed hay softly, unconcerned, eyes half-lidded, as if the world had never learned how to wound him. An official paused nearby, voice low, words sharp as frost. "It's not too late to reconsider." Jane nodded without answering. For a moment, doubt crept in, thin, cold, insistent. She wondered if heart was enough in a place built on money and polish. Muffin exhaled, long and calm, his breath fogging the air. The doubt loosened its grip. Morning broke pale and bright. The arena filled with sound, boots on gravel, metal rails clinking, a crowd buzzing with expectation that leaned toward failure. Jane swung into the saddle, leather creaking, the reins worn smooth by years of quiet work. The bell rang. Silence followed. They moved. Each fence came fast and unforgiving, shadows stretching long beneath the jumps. Muffin's muscles burned, his breath rasped, but he kept coming, compact, determined, refusing the easy out. Rails trembled, but stayed up. Jane felt every stride like a promise kept, every landing a small miracle. When they cleared the final oxer, the sound that followed wasn't polite applause. It was a roar, raw and stunned. The scoreboard flickered. Then it settled. Muffin's name sat at the top. Faces tightened. Some turned away. Others stared, forced to see what they'd dismissed. Phones rose. Cheers spilled into the open sky. By nightfall, the story had escaped the grounds, shared, replayed, believed. The paint horse who wouldn't quit. The rider who didn't bow. Apologies arrived softly. Offers followed. But the truest change came quieter still. New horses entered the ring, different shapes, different stories, all carrying a little more hope. Jane returned to Muffin's stall as dusk fell, ribbons rustling in the breeze. He leaned into her, solid and warm, exactly as he'd always been. Sometimes the system bends. Sometimes it breaks. And sometimes it learns. The applause hadn't faded when the silence began. It crept in quietly, settling behind smiles and handshakes, slipping into the corners of celebration like a shadow that didn't belong. Jane felt it before she heard it. The way conversation stopped when she walked past. The way eyes lingered too long on Muffin, as if trying to figure out how he'd broken something sacred. Victory, she learned, could be dangerous. By morning, the tone had shifted. Officials spoke in careful language about eligibility and the image of the sport. Papers were shuffled. Meetings happened behind closed doors. Someone suggested, gently, that perhaps Muffin should retire while the story was still charming. Jane stood in the cold barn aisle, breath fogging the air, her fingers wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee, listening to people explain why her success was a problem. Headlines followed. Tradition versus chaos. Order versus disruption. A paint horse became a threat. Jane read the words alone in her trailer late at night, the glow of her phone lighting tired lines in her face. For the first time, she wondered if winning had cost her everything. Muffin stood outside, rain darkening his patchwork coat, utterly unbothered. When Jane pressed her forehead against his neck, she felt the steady warmth there, the quiet strength that had carried them this far. He didn't know about politics or power. He only knew how to show up. That was the moment she decided not to disappear. She said no. No to stepping aside. No to shrinking herself to make others comfortable. And something unexpected happened. Messages poured in. Parents, kids, riders with horses that didn't fit the mold. Sponsors followed, not for polish, but for truth. The story slipped from the hands of the elite and into the public's heart. The rules changed course without ceremony. Proposals vanished. New horses appeared at events, shorter, scruffier, different. Muffin's name faded from headlines, but his influence didn't. It lived on in every rider who dared to believe they belonged. One quiet evening, Jane watched Muffin graze as the sun dipped low, painting the world in gold. The trophy sat dusty in the trailer. The real victory stood breathing in front of her. Sometimes winning doesn't end the fight. Sometimes it begins a revolution. The arena was empty now, swept clean of cheers and cameras, the night air cool against the skin. Jane sat on the edge of the stall, boots dusty, Ribbon folded in her lap, listening to Muffin breathe. The sound was slow and steady, like a tide that never rushed. Winning was supposed to feel louder than this. Instead, doubt whispered in the quiet. Was the fight worth the scars it left behind? She traced the rough grain of the wooden door, remembering the looks, the laughter, the way success had sharpened into resistance. Muffin nudged her shoulder, patient, unconcerned with questions that kept humans awake. He smelled of hay and sweat, and something warm and honest. Jane pressed her forehead to his neck and closed her eyes, letting the moment be small. The letters began arriving weeks later. Envelopes with uneven handwriting. Emails written late at night by parents who'd watched their children shrink under the word, "not good enough." A girl wrote about a pony with crooked legs and a crooked grin. A boy thanked her for making his dream feel possible again. Jane read them alone at her kitchen table, sunlight slanting across the floor, realizing the win had never been about points or podiums. It had been a door. Time softened the noise. Muffin retired sound, content, his fame never touching the calm in his eyes. He grazed in long afternoons, tail swishing lazily, as if the world had always been this kind. Jane kept training horses others overlooked, too short, too plain, too wrong for the picture people wanted. Slowly, the picture changed. One spring morning, she stood by a quiet ring, dust lifting in the warm light. A child rode past on a horse that didn't belong to any brochure. Thick neck, mismatched socks, ears flicking with curiosity. The pair moved together, unsure but brave. Jane felt something ease inside her chest. She smiled, knowing the cycle had cracked. Potential had never lived in appearances. It lived in belief, in patience, in the courage to stay when leaving would be easier. Muffin lifted his head from the grass and walked over, resting his chin on her shoulder. The world felt wider than it used to.